Why exactly the leftist game is rigged. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and 2 of the last 3 videos I made were dedicated to some recent happenings that managed to annoy all sorts of people to the political right, the center, and wherever libertarians consider themselves. Those were the Gillette ad and the Covington High School smirking incident. In each case, my response to these current events was not one of any sort of insightful contemplation, which is the type of tone I usually try to put forth in my videos, but rather, I just stated some predictions about how people would react to each of these events. And then when I saw the results, I was shocked only by how non-shocked I was, and it took me a while to even have anything to say at all. You see, the way people have handled the conversation about both the Gillette ad and much more so the Covington High School incident has shown exactly what we are dealing with when it comes to the heinous hatefulness and complete and utter irrationality we are looking at when we attempt to examine the overall state of the left. And while I'll admit it surpassed my own cynical expectations, I was also left speechless because it didn't surprise me. Here's the thing. After making both my hour-long Intersectional Feminism is Communist Particle Board and the subsequent video called What Do Postmodern Neo-Marxists Even Want?, I feel like I have kind of put to rest a lot of the uncertainty in my own mind about whether or not there is anything worth salvaging from the current incarnation of the intersectional feminist, quasi-Marxist, postmodern left, and really, if there was any doubt, these 2 events reminded me that there simply isn't anything worth salvaging. Sorry, not sorry for saying so, but the leaders of the left are complete and utter trash, and the only reason anybody would support them at this point would be pure ignorance about their true nature or the nature of their opponents, i.e., the Trump administration is sadly quite decent in comparison, or because somebody legitimately holds the same ideological sickness within their own mind, which is the ideology currently known as intersectional feminism that evolved from Marxism while stopping through postmodernism. Really though, as I explained in both of the 2 aforementioned videos, the main thing that is really consistent in this ideology, which has all sorts of splintered sub-ideologies within it, like anarcho-communism and Marxist-Leninism, the main things that these people have in common is a hatred for 3 things: men, white people, and capitalism. That's seriously the only thing these people tend to be able to agree upon because, well, it's not like they actually have any helpful ideas. However, apparently that was enough for these people to push an entire candidate up all the way into the Oval Office for 8 years. And that's precisely who Obama was, according to David Horowitz, who was raised by communist parents and was so well connected to the Marxist left in our nation during his young adult life that he at one time did massive fundraising work for the Black Panthers.
This is why I say Barack Obama is a communist. He was raised by communists. His whole political career until he became a United States Senator was in the communist left. I know these people. If you are part of a movement that you know is evil, the first thing you want to do is warn other people about it, especially when it's so deceptive. It talks about social justice and all this crap.
Now, granted, there is a part of me that wants to say that he's sort of exaggerating when he says that Obama is a communist, as truthfully, I imagine that like most people who are completely ideologically possessed with some bastardized version of Marxism passed down from generations after the McCarthy era, Obama didn't technically consider himself a communist the entire time he was in office, because that's the very nature of the beast. Here's the thing. The pivotal notion to keep in mind when examining these people is that the dramatic majority of them did learn that communism doesn't actually work in practice, and some of the scholars admitted perfectly well that communism literally could never work. However, they still see the world as a horribly unfair conflict between the oppressed and the oppressors, made possible by capitalism, which of course is championed by white males, and so, according to these people, fighting those things became the only thing they really cared about. even though that's all they care about. There was no end goal in mind, but rather just a lot of hate and resentment. So when they got one of their guys into the Oval Office for 8 years, and surprise, surprise, he ended up being by far the worst president that we've had, certainly over the past 40 years, and likely actually ever, there was absolutely no justifying all of the things that he did. So instead, he and his administration just legalized the usage of propaganda on the American people halfway through his presidency so that he could lie to everybody about anything that his administration felt like it.
Well, it made almost no headlines, and yet a major piece of legislation was quietly signed into law a little over a week ago. President Obama signed a bill that allows the U.S. government to combat foreign propaganda by creating its own. Let's take a look and give it a reality check.
But wait, he was saying that the bill was designed to make it so that the United States could create propaganda to combat foreign propaganda, not to use on its own citizens. Oh, gee, you're so smart. It didn't occur to me that they'd attempt to market this as something non-devious to get the House and Senate to be accepting of a completely fascistic bill pushed up by people that were working with the worst president of my lifetime. But now that you mention it, obviously people would be less inclined to sign on to what it was if they knew precisely what we'd be dealing with after it went into law in 2013. Regardless, clearly by around 2013, everything got really bad in media. And by the end of 2013, literally everybody had to have noticed that the only stories that were getting any sort of attention were all of the typical MTV's decoded race-baiting propaganda and feminist gender grievance histrionics from sites like Jezebel and Everyday Feminism. And why was this? Well, this is obviously because of the fact that Obama was such a horrifically economically incompetent president that he did this to the national debt, while also starting numerous secret wars, particularly the one in Libya, which were almost exclusively fought with drones, which were also used to assassinate United States citizens. And so, Obama and his administration figured that they should just distract us all with identity politics because they were doing so many horrible things. Yes, I'm going to keep saying this over and over until this hopefully becomes generally accepted wisdom. Obama was literally the absolute worst president of the past 40 years by every tangible metric available. And the only reason that this is any news to anybody is because, first, it was completely taboo to ever criticize the guy, as even Republicans were afraid of calling a spade due to the fact that all criticisms of him would be titled as racist, and being called racist was a political death sentence during his administration. And secondly, because of the fact that Obama legalized the usage of propaganda on the American people anyway, the media working class that developed over the past 6 years especially was taking orders directly from the top as if they were agents of the Democratic Party. So they obviously sat around singing his praises because that was their paycheck. And thus, that was how the game was rigged. Because long story short, Obama managed to win the presidency because he was a black guy, and then managed to lose the game of actually being any sort of decent president by any of the metrics we'd use to normally judge presidents that weren't affirmative action hires. But since nobody was allowed to say that he stunk in the entire nation, people started lying and blaming the three tried and true scapegoats: white people, men, and capitalism, even when it didn't apply, which was apparently usually.
That's how whiteness works. Whiteness is the most violent fucking system to ever breathe.
Yes, this attitude of I hate white men and liberal democracies because my hate overpowers my logical brain is the epitome of irrationality. But this was not just enabled, but encouraged under Obama, because that hatred was what the entire Obama administration was built upon, which is why you will never hear the end of the white male bashing or even the bashing of liberals from people who self-identify as leftists but not liberals, like that means something substantially different than Marxist. Personally, I kind of suspect that they know fairly well that being a quote-unquote leftist doesn't really mean anything besides some sort of bastardized version of Marxism. It's like they aren't supposed to say that they're communists because communism doesn't work, but the right is akin to Satan to them, and they don't like liberals either because liberals still aren't communists, which are good, minus the fact that communism doesn't work, but whatever. So they'll just settle on being called the left and making sure to demonize liberals most regularly as they are the lowest hanging fruit. Leftists have no propensity to attack the right, not only because they simply don't actually understand basically anything about the right, because remember, even their patron saint ContraPoints, who is seen as the smartest leftist on the internet, had no capacity to argue against libertarianism in freaking grad school because that's how little leftists understand the right wing, but more so, because leftists basically never encounter right-wing people for any sort of civil conversation, they end up taking out their frustrations on liberals, who have the ability to at least be realistic and strive for practical and obtainable forward-thinking goals regarding their economic and governmental ideas, whereas leftists will just say, "But you don't hate white people and men enough, capitalist!" I honestly think it's about so simple, which is why it wasn't of any surprise to me when, after the information came out about the Covington boys being completely innocent, the general response from the leftist supporters and leftist propaganda class was to act like this article from The Root, where they basically just said, "Well, we don't care, fool! They are still white males, so they still wrong to show their faces in public. Don't they know people of color is always right even if they wrong? Obama changed the rules and we ain't gonna let them change back because rationality is a tool of the white patriarchy." Similarly, is it any wonder why people continue to insist that the Gillette ad was just a good reminder for men to not be dicks, in spite of the fact that anybody with half of a brain has noticed by now that males have been walking on eggshells for years in absolute fear of upsetting the women of the West, who have largely grown into a socially tyrannical force after they unionized under fourth wave feminism to lie about any guy who crosses them? It's the same thing that happened with the Kavanaugh hearing. People admitted that yes, it was messed up that this Gillette ad targeted all males as horrible toxic beasts for no reason at all, but of course, like with Kavanaugh, men had the audacity to defend themselves, which was clearly proof that they were awful the whole time after all, because they got upset about the ad. The left relies very heavily on Kafka trapping to make their points, of course. Yes, the game is beyond rigged, but there's definitely hope. You don't have to be leftists or Democrats at all. I know, mind-blowing as it is, it's actually true. You see, the Democratic Party and the leftists they ushered into their ranks will keep capitulating to this mentality where right is wrong because ideology, where white is wrong unless they are bootlickers, where males are horrible because they are not females, even when the females are demonstrably worse, and where somehow capitalism is supposed to be the enemy, even though we all live under it, and even though it pays all of our bills. But here's the hopeful news. The Democrats and their parasitic leftists will eventually collapse entirely unless the Democrats learn to grow a spine and some self-respect and unanimously purge these people from their ranks entirely. And there's a very specific reason for that. Capitalism and trade are inevitabilities, as these things emerge even within communist governments as a literal rule. And while I have literally seen leftists who are so ideologically possessed that they claim to believe meritocracy itself to be an oppressive farce, what this really means is that these people are literally championing not just mediocrity, but much worse. They in effect end up championing failure as a virtue. And if that's your game plan, you've obviously already lost. Yeah, I know it sounds far-fetched, but that's exactly and necessarily what you end up with when you elect a president because of the color of his skin, and then he tanks our economy, starts numerous secret wars, and then decides to create an army of propagandists to attempt to keep his party in power for as long as possible. The propaganda army will logically and without a doubt end up defending wrongdoing and their own shortcomings as if it is a virtue. It will unanimously defend racism as a core value if it was their own affirmative action hire president who got them into this mess. And it will unanimously oppress men for the sheer reality of the fact that as men, they tend to be high-achieving, competitive, and capable. Because the fact of the matter is this. After 8 years under affirmative action Obama as our president, being that he had nothing to show for his 2 terms besides abject failure in every area aside from maybe the shoddy Affordable Care Act, his only option was to try to play it off as victories by creating an ideological bizarro world where he and his propagandist minions all collectively say together, "We meant to mess up. That was the whole point. You only care about our economy because you value capitalism anyway, white boy." But after a while, that tune will get old to literally everybody. If you found this video cathartic or oddly inspirational, you can send me a tip on PayPal, and I will be setting up a Subscribestar account within the next few days so that you can regularly donate to me there. Thanks a bunch.